The lake sat on the edge of the town like a scar, its waters dark and filled with floating trash, its shores covered in weeds that grew wild and thick, its wooden docks broken and sinking into the mud, and for years no one cared about it. The people of the town walked past it without a second glance, calling it useless land, a place for mosquitoes and garbage. The children were told not to go near it. The old men said it had been a fine place long ago but was now cursed. Even the local council had forgotten its value, leaving it abandoned and rotting. But for the main character, the lake was different. When he first stumbled upon it, he saw not the weeds or the dirt, but the reflection of what it could be. He stood at the shore on that first day, the evening sun sinking behind the hills, and he imagined the water clear and bright, the trees green and full, the sound of laughter and life surrounding it again. It was not just a dream to him. It was a calling, something deep inside told him that this lake was meant to be saved, so he decided that if no one else would care for it, he would, even if it cost him time, money, and sleepless nights, he would breathe life back into the forgotten water. At first it seemed impossible. He had no crew, no machines, no funding, only his 2 hands and determination. He began by walking the edges of the lake every day with a trash bag, collecting bottles, rusted cans, plastic, and scraps that had been thrown carelessly for years. Neighbors laughed when they saw him, calling him foolish for wasting time on land that belonged to no one. But he ignored their words, carrying bag after bag to the dumpsters, slowly clearing space. Then he borrowed a small boat, its paint peeling, and rowed across the filthy water, dragging nets to scoop out floating waste. His clothes smelled of rot when he returned home. His hands raw from the rope. Yet he went back again the next day, then again the day after, and with every week that passed the surface of the water grew clearer, no longer covered in trash. He planted saplings along the shore, young trees that would one day grow tall and strong, their roots holding the soil firm, their leaves bringing shade. He fixed the broken docks with his own tools, replacing old boards with new ones, hammering in the quiet mornings when no one was watching. One plank at a time he rebuilt what others had abandoned, and though the progress was slow it was steady. The lake began to change. Birds that had once vanished now returned, ducks gliding across the surface, sparrows singing in the branches of the young trees. Fish began to swim again in waters that were no longer poisoned, and families who once avoided the area out of fear and disgust began to wander back. Children came first, curious and bold, their laughter filling the air as they threw stones and watched the ripples. Then mothers arrived, sitting on the benches he had repaired, enjoying the breeze. And soon fathers came with fishing rods, remembering the old days when the lake had been full of life. The main character watched all this quietly, his heart swelling with pride. He never asked for thanks, never demanded applause. The sight of life returning to the lake was reward enough. But whispers began to spread through the town. Whispers that he had taken the forgotten lake and given it new breath. Whispers that perhaps he saw value where others did not. Some said he was wasting his money and effort. Others said he was trying to make himself look like a hero, but many began to admire his dedication. They called him the man who brought back the lake. Yet not all whispers were kind. Some voices carried envy, wondering why he cared so much, asking who gave him the right to take over what had been abandoned. And in the midst of this change, eyes that had been watching from a distance began to focus sharply on him. Powerful eyes that saw not the beauty of the lake but the opportunity it now carried. For where there is beauty, greed always follows, and while he worked with sweat and heart, there were already people plotting how to claim what he had restored. He could feel it sometimes as he walked through the town, the weight of stares, the hush of conversations ending when he passed, the slight shift in neighbors' voices when they spoke of the lake. But he said nothing. He continued his work, planting more trees, repairing more benches, even setting up small lanterns that glowed at night and made the lake shimmer like glass under the moonlight. The people loved it. Families began to gather there for picnics. Young couples strolled hand in hand by the water. Children raced each other along the dock, and the once dead lake became the heart of the community again. Yet deep in the shadows, the seeds of conflict were already planted, because something so beautiful and valuable could never stay free from the grip of those hungry for control. The whispers grew louder each day, and though the main character's face remained calm, his heart sensed the storm on the horizon. The lake had returned to life. But so had the greed of those who would try to seize it first. The HOA hardly paid attention to the lake. Karen and her board were too busy sending letters to neighbors about paint colors, mailbox sizes, and lawn lengths. They saw the main character working there as nothing more than a strange hobby. Some even joked that he was wasting his weekends cleaning a swamp. But when weeks turned into months and the lake transformed from a dirty forgotten pond into a shining mirror of blue water surrounded by green, their eyes shifted. Suddenly the place they once mocked began to draw people from all around. Families walking down in the evenings, children running to play on the rebuilt docks, old couples sitting under the young trees he had planted, the laughter and joy spreading through the air like music. And soon people began to talk about the man who had brought the lake back to life. Neighbors thanked him, strangers praised him, and the lake that was once avoided now became the pride of the community. That was the moment when Karen's smile turned thin, because in her eyes nothing beautiful could exist without the HOA controlling it. She called an urgent meeting in the boardroom, slamming photos of the restored lake onto the table. Her voice sharp as she said the lake was not his, it was community property. That fell under their rules. Some board members hesitated, reminding her that he had bought the land fair and legal, but she silenced them with promises of profit. She painted grand pictures of turning the lake into a private HOA clubhouse with gates, fees, and events. She said they could raise funds, increase their influence, and make their names shine. Greed sparkled in their eyes and soon whispers spread through the neighborhood. Letters began arriving at his home, written on official HOA paper. The first one congratulated him on improvements to community property but politely demanded that he submit all future changes to the HOA for approval. He read it quietly, folded it, and set it aside without replying. Days later a second letter arrived, more aggressive this time, accusing him of unauthorized construction because he had repaired the dock and added benches. The letter demanded fines to be paid immediately. He did not answer. Instead he walked to the lake and kept working, planting more saplings, making the shoreline stronger. A week later a third letter came, threatening legal action, claiming that the HOA board had voted to recognize the lake as under their authority. The neighbors who once praised him now grew confused. Some asked if the lake really belonged to him. Others whispered that the HOA would take it sooner or later because they always did. Karen fueled the confusion by boasting loudly in community meetings, saying that he had no right to claim the lake, that the board would soon take control. She stood at the front of the room waving papers and speaking as if the land was already theirs. Some clapped nervously, others stayed quiet, but the main character remained silent, sitting in the back with calm eyes, letting her words poison the crowd while he watched patiently. He knew what she did not, that her power was built only on fear and noise, while his was built on law and truth. Still the tension grew heavier. Neighbors started avoiding him, afraid of being caught in the fight. Children who once played at the lake now stayed away, unsure of who really owned it. And every evening when he walked along the water's edge, lanterns glowing softly and the reflection of stars shimmering on the surface, he could feel the weight of the storm building. The HOA had finally noticed. Karen had finally chosen her battlefield. And though she thought the lake was already slipping into her grasp, she had no idea that her greed was walking her straight into the trap of her own destruction. The first signs of real harassment came quietly. A stranger in a reflective vest walked along the lake one morning with a clipboard, scribbling notes, measuring the dock, and shaking his head as if disappointed. When the main character asked who sent him, the man only muttered HOA inspection and left without giving a card. The next day a notice was taped to his door accusing him of building unsafe structures without permission, demanding heavy fines and threatening removal. He tore it down calmly and returned to work at the lake. But Karen was only warming up. Within weeks more letters came, each one harsher, accusing him of violating rules he had never agreed to, claiming he needed HOA approval for planting trees, claiming the benches he built were a liability risk, even accusing him of polluting the water by disturbing the natural balance, which was ironic since the lake had been filled with trash before he cleaned it. Neighbors began whispering again, their smiles fading. Some avoided eye contact, afraid the HOA would punish them for showing support. Children who once played at the shore were scolded by parents not to go near. Signs appeared overnight at the lake saying private property, HOA controlled, nailed crookedly into the ground. And though he pulled them out each time, new ones would appear, as if a game of control was being played in the shadows. One evening he returned from town to find yellow caution tape stretched across the dock and warning cones placed around the benches. The tape fluttered in the wind like a symbol of their arrogance. And Karen stood nearby with two board members, smiling smugly as she told passing neighbors that the lake was unsafe and that the HOA would soon renovate it properly. Her words were poisoned with lies but spoken with confidence, and some people believed her, others looked confused, and a few even nodded in agreement. Karen enjoyed the attention, waving her clipboard as if she already owned the place. Each day the harassment grew sharper, trucks parked near the shore, men taking photos as if gathering evidence, and another notice arrived, this time declaring that the lake would officially be considered HOA property starting the next month. The main character read it in silence, his eyes steady, his heart calm but burning inside. He did not respond, he did not shout or argue. Instead he continued planting trees, mending the soil, and polishing the dock boards. To the outside world he looked defeated, a man buried under endless pressure. But deep inside he was waiting for them to cross the final line. Karen mistook his silence for weakness, whispering at meetings that he was already giving up. She bragged that soon the HOA would chain the gates and charge fees for every family who stepped near the water. Her arrogance spread like wildfire. But what she could not see was that every move she made only tightened the rope around her own neck, and while she laughed and posed as queen of the lake, the man she thought powerless was quietly preparing to strike back with a force that would tear her false empire apart, for the harassment was only the beginning, and the real fight had not yet started. The morning of the takeover began with the rumble of engines. The main character woke to the sound of heavy trucks rolling down the road, and when he stepped outside he saw a convoy of HOA vehicles lined along the lake shore. Workers in uniforms unloading tools, clipboards, and even padlocks as if they were about to build something permanent. Karen stood at the front in her sharp red jacket, sunglasses covering her eyes, her arms folded with a look of triumph. She called out loudly that the HOA was officially reclaiming the lake, her voice echoing as neighbors gathered around to watch, some curious, some nervous, others secretly thrilled at the drama. The workers moved fast under her orders, hammering signs into the ground that read HOA property, no trespassing without permission, painting over the benches he had built, and even wrapping chains around the dock posts to block access. Karen strutted up and down like a queen inspecting her land, telling the crowd that this was the dawn of a new era, that soon there would be a private clubhouse, a swimming area, and fees that would make the community stronger. The crowd buzzed with mixed emotions, a few clapped, others whispered in doubt. But Karen spoke with such confidence that many believed her. Meanwhile the main character stood silently at the edge of the water, his hands in his pockets, his expression calm but unreadable. He watched as they trampled the grass he had planted, tore down the lanterns he had fixed, and laughed as if his work meant nothing. Karen noticed his silence and took it as surrender. She smirked at him in front of everyone and declared that the lake was no longer his, that he should step aside before legal action ruined him completely. Her voice dripped with arrogance and the board members behind her nodded like puppets. The workers carried on, replacing his signs with shiny new ones stamped with the HOA logo, marking the territory as if they had always owned it. The air grew heavy with humiliation as neighbors looked at him, waiting for a reaction. But he gave them none. He simply turned, walked slowly along the dock that now bore their chains, and knelt to place his hand on the water, feeling the ripples against his skin. In that quiet moment he did not see defeat. He saw their greed reaching too far. He saw the perfect mistake he had been waiting for. Karen raised her arms and declared victory, her voice carrying across the lake, her laughter ringing in the air. She believed the battle was over, that the lake was hers, but she had no idea that the papers she waved, the authority she boasted, and the entire show she put on that day would be the very things that destroyed her. For behind his calm eyes he carried the truth, the legal deed, the ownership, the water rights, all signed and sealed, hidden like a sword waiting to strike. And while Karen celebrated her hollow conquest, the main character was already preparing for the moment he would step into the light and tear her dream apart in front of everyone. For this takeover was not the end, it was the trigger, the first stone falling in an avalanche that would bury the HOA forever. The next HOA meeting was packed tighter than ever before, the hall buzzing with voices as neighbors, investors, and curious townsfolk crowded into every chair, some even standing along the walls, all eager to hear Karen's big announcement about the lake. She had spread word across the neighborhood that the HOA had officially taken control, boasting that the lake would be transformed into a profitable centerpiece, promising private events, exclusive access, and high property values. She entered the hall like a queen, her red jacket glowing under the lights, her heels clicking with arrogance, the board members trailing behind her like guards. She raised her hand and the room fell quiet. With a wide smile she began her speech, declaring, That the lake was no longer just a forgotten piece of land but a jewel restored by the efforts of the community. She twisted the truth, taking credit for the restoration, claiming that the HOA had overseen the improvements and that the man who worked on it had simply been helping on behalf of the board. Gasps rippled through the room, but she spoke with such false authority that some nodded. Karen's voice grew louder, promising a new clubhouse, picnic grounds, a boating area, and of course, HOA fees to support it all. The crowd clapped nervously, some excited by the idea of profit, others unsure. But Karen's pride filled every corner of the room. That was when the main character rose from his seat in the back, his movement drawing all eyes to him. The hall grew silent as he walked slowly to the front, carrying a folder in his hand, his expression calm, his step steady. Karen smirked, thinking he had come to beg or argue. She invited him mockingly to speak, telling him to make peace with reality, but he only opened the folder and laid it on the table before her, his voice quiet yet sharp as a blade as he announced that every word she had spoken was a lie. He explained that he was the sole legal owner of the lake, its land, and its water rights, purchased fair and square with deeds signed by the county and sealed in records that could not be challenged. The hall erupted in whispers, faces turning in shock. Karen froze, her smile cracking as he pulled out document after document, holding them up for the crowd to see, the official deed, the land survey maps, the environmental clearance forms, all bearing his name, his signature, and the county seal. He turned to the crowd and revealed how the HOA had lied, how they had filed false claims, sent fake notices, and harassed him without authority. His calm voice carried through the hall as he detailed every violation, exposing Karen's arrogance and corruption. The investors shifted uncomfortably, some glaring at Karen with fury. The neighbors who had doubted him now looked ashamed, and the board members behind Karen lowered their eyes, realizing the trap they had walked into. Karen tried to laugh it off, stammering that the HOA had community rights. But he raised the final paper, a legal statement confirming the HOA had no jurisdiction over the lake whatsoever. Silence crushed the hall like a weight, then gasps turned into murmurs, then into open anger directed at Karen, the Queen's crown. Shattered in front of everyone, her red jacket now nothing but a costume of lies. The main character did not shout, did not gloat. He simply looked at her and said in a calm voice that the lake was his, always had been his, and always would be his. Then he turned and walked back through the crowd as the whispers grew louder, neighbors staring at Karen with disgust, investors storming out, and the board members abandoning her one by one. Karen stood frozen, pale and trembling. The meeting that was meant to secure her triumph had become the stage of her humiliation, and everyone present knew the truth. She had been defeated not by noise or threats, but by cold, undeniable reality. The fallout from that meeting spread through the neighborhood like fire. The very next morning, investors who had once proudly shaken Karen's hand began calling her with fury in their voices, demanding their money back, demanding answers about the lies she had told them, some even threatening lawsuits for fraud. Her phone rang non-stop, each call cutting deeper into her pride, while neighbors whispered loudly in the streets about how she had been humiliated in front of everyone. The HOA board members who once stood by her side now turned their backs. One resigned quietly, another blamed her in public, and the rest avoided her completely, afraid of being dragged down with her. The once powerful HOA meetings turned into empty rooms where only a few bitter voices tried to defend her, but no one listened. The authority that Karen had used like a weapon was gone, stripped away by her own arrogance. Fines she had sent were ignored, her letters thrown away, her words carried no weight anymore, and the more she shouted the more people laughed. The lake that she claimed as hers was now openly known as his. The man she mocked as powerless now respected as the rightful owner. Families returned to the lake in greater numbers, enjoying its peace without fear, while Karen watched from her window in silence, her empire crumbling brick by brick. Newspapers picked up the story, publishing articles about the HOA fraud exposed. Pictures of her red jacket at the meeting splashed across front pages, her head bowed as he held the legal documents high. The humiliation spread beyond the neighborhood, reaching nearby towns, people pointing fingers at her whenever she walked through the market, whispers turning into laughter. Children mocking her name in the playgrounds, the proud queen of rules reduced to a joke. She tried one last desperate move, filing a lawsuit against him in county court, claiming again that the lake belonged to the community. But when the judge reviewed the deed and water rights, the case was dismissed before it even began. Her defeat was sealed in official ink, leaving her reputation in ruins. The HOA funds which she once controlled were drained to pay for her legal failures. The board fractured, and the neighbors finally realized they had followed a liar into disaster. Many of them came to the lake to apologize to him, some with shame in their eyes, some with guilt heavy in their voices. He accepted their words quietly, never boasting, never seeking revenge in words, because the collapse itself was enough. He didn't need to shout about his victory. It was written in Karen's pale face, in the empty HOA office, in the silence where once there had been arrogance, and in the broken legacy she could never repair. The more she tried to stand tall, the more she sank, until at last she became invisible, a name spoken only in disgust, while he continued to walk by the lake at sunset, calm, steady, watching the water ripple in peace, knowing that her collapse was complete, and that the fight she began had ended with her own destruction. The lake shimmered under the evening sun, its surface calm, carrying the golden glow of the sky as if it were a jewel in the heart of the town. The same lake that once smelled of rot and filth now reflected life and beauty. Children ran across the dock he had rebuilt, their laughter ringing in the air. Families spread picnic blankets under the shade of the young trees he had planted. Fishermen cast their lines into the clear water, and birds swooped low, diving for fish that had returned after years of absence. The place that was once abandoned and forgotten had become the pride of the community. And at the center of it all stood the man who had refused to give up, his quiet strength written in every plank of wood, every sapling, every lantern glowing softly when the night fell. People no longer whispered doubts about him. They spoke with respect, their voices carrying gratitude. Some came to shake his hand, others offered to help with future projects. But he never asked for thanks. He only smiled and continued his work, because for him the lake was never about pride. It was about life, legacy, and truth. And though the HOA had tried to seize it, they had only destroyed themselves in the attempt. Karen was nowhere to be seen now. Her red jacket and arrogant smile vanished from the streets. She lived in the shadow of her humiliation. A name that neighbors spoke with disgust or pity, her empire of fines, rules, and threats buried under the weight of her lies. She had once claimed the lake would be her triumph, but now the only legacy she left was a lesson of greed. Meanwhile, the lake grew stronger, more beautiful, and more alive. With every passing season the trees grew taller, their roots deep and unshakable, just like his resolve. He often walked along the shore at sunset, the reflection of the water calm against his eyes, and remembered the day bulldozers, trucks, and chains came to take what was his. The day he chose silence over shouting, patience over anger, and truth over fear, and he smiled, because the silence had spoken louder than her noise. The patience had broken her arrogance, and the truth had crushed her lies. He had not only reclaimed the lake, he had reclaimed his dignity, his peace, and his family's pride. And as he stood at the highest point of the shore, watching the lake stretch wide and free, he whispered softly that the battle was over. But the story would never be forgotten, because this lake was no longer just water and land. It was a symbol of resilience, proof that no matter how powerful greed may seem, it will always fall when faced with truth. He turned and walked home, lanterns glowing behind him, laughter still echoing by the water, the air filled with peace, the lake reclaimed forever, and his victory written not in words but in the ripples of water that would carry the story for generations to come.